All right, I want to jump into a little lesson on history paralleled with prophecy. This is something that we've touched on in the past, but I think is very helpful to beginners and to people that know the Bible, because I think it has to do with Daniel chapter 11, Revelation, etc. And so what we're going to do is look at a couple things on the computer, but I want to spend most of our time on this timeline. There's two timelines, one from 2000 BC to the time of Christ, and then the time of Christ down to today. And what I'd like to see are the parallels, which are very obvious. If you go into the computer and you type in the first civilization, many of us should know that the first thing that pops up is Mesopotamia. And just so that we can get a visual on this, if you look at a photo, Mesopotamia was comprised of ancient Babylon or Babylonia and ancient Assyria. For those that know the Bible, this was founded by Nimrod. Nimrod first founded the cities that were in the plains or the plain of Shinar, which included Babylon, and then later went to the north and founded Nineveh and Kalal, etc. And we're going to look at that, I think, right now. If someone does not believe in the Bible, I do believe that Nimrod is Sargon of Akkad. If you're a secularist and you're wanting to look at things. But Sargon of Akkad, we could look this up too, is credited for being the founder of empire. So let me turn the screen actually before I forget, so we can look at this whiteboard. So as you can see, again, from 2000 BC to the time of Christ, and then from the time of Christ down to today, about our time. When you come to 2000, circa 2000 BC, Babylon and Assyria are already considered empires. And what happens is these empires, they grow, and they become really too big for themselves, and there's a collapse. And you could read about this in Google. There's a lot of speculation of why these civilizations collapsed. We're not going to go into that. I'd like to actually cover what happens here, and we can start to see some parallels and kind of figure out what occurred in the past, right? As Solomon says, there's nothing new under the sun. But remember that this was, Assyria and Babylon. And really, it was the Sumerians, the Akkadians, a lot of different tribes, in this time. Shortly after this, we have here what is referred to as the Bronze Age collapse. And so there's not that much information from this time, and there's a lot of interesting literature. Again, if you go online and watch some videos by historians that are talking about that time period. This was a very dark period in ancient history, and if you want to refer to the Bible, this was the time of, it started around 1250 BC, and I would say that this dark age goes to 911, about let's just say 910 BC, when Assyria started to come back into power. But this time period are the time of the judges, and so those that know the book of Judges in the Bible, it's the darkest book. It's the most people that are really in darkness. There's a lot of death, a lot of the horrific things that people cite are often in the book of Judges, and so it was during this time period. But after this, again, in about 910 BC, is when you have Neo-Assyria starts to come into power. And then after Neo-Assyria, you have Neo-Babylonia. Okay, what does Neo mean? Okay. Neo means new. Okay, and online this actually is referred to as a renaissance or a golden age. Okay, and so what I want to point out is that you have here, remember I mentioned that Nimrod was very much likely Sargon of Akkad. And here you have the Sargonid dynasty that begins. And what they're doing is they're naming themselves after Sargon of Akkad of ancient Assyria and ancient Babylon. Okay. Now this is ancient Assyria and ancient Babylon. This is Neo-Assyria and Neo-Babylon. Okay, and I'll just put Neo up here. Again, Neo means new. Okay. Okay, you get it. But what I really want to emphasize here is what they were doing. Okay, they were naming themselves, they were glorifying kings of the past, and their artwork, okay, is the subjects and what they're pointing to is the past. When you come to Babylon, again, when you start to read about the writings at this time, which I actually have a book here on Babylon, and most of the stuff that is spoken about in this book, okay, which comes from our writings from around this time, are always talking about ancient Babylon. They're pointing back. And so, interesting, because we're going to see that same thing paralleled today. But Babylon falls. It falls in 539 BC to the Persians. Okay, and what you have here is, somewhat of, well, I don't want to go into too much detail here, but Cyrus the Great, he allows people to return back to their home of origin. He allows people to worship in the way that they choose. And this is recorded, of course, in the scriptures, and it's recorded outside of the scriptures. Cyropedia is a book about the life of Cyrus, someone who is an admired figure in ancient history. But you have, we could say, liberty of conscience that is recognized at this time. And what I want to do is, before I go any further here, I'd like to point out what happens here, and that way we can kind of parallel it a lot easier. Now remember that in 27 BC, okay, is when Rome became an empire. And so by this time, Rome is already an empire, just like Mesopotamia had already grown into an empire. And so you have this empire that's growing in strength, but then you have this collapse. Okay, whether you say that it collapses under Diocletian, where you have the divide into the east and west. Okay, the empire was divided, just like the empire here was divided. Okay, another parallel. And so the empire, again, collapse. I'm thinking of 3 different time periods, but I want to make this very simple, and then we can go into more detail. But there is a collapse. And so, again, whether you want to say that it's with Diocletian or whether it's with, the Goths, the Vandals, the different tribes that were taking over Rome, okay, in 476 BC. And then you have, I'm going into too much detail, but you have a collapse of Rome. Let's just make it really simple. And what happens is, shortly after that, you go into the Dark Ages, okay? So just like you have the Dark Ages here, okay, in the Bronze Age collapse. Did I skip this? So this was the Bronze Age collapse, or known as the Dark Ages, the Greek Dark Ages, okay? So you have a Dark Age here, and then you have a Dark Age here. Okay, I'm just gonna put D-A, Dark Age. And so a lot of, anyway, again, we could talk about a lot of things here. After this Dark Age, or the Middle Ages, we come into the Renaissance, where Rome is starting to gain back its power. Okay, just like you have a Renaissance here with Neo-Babylonia, okay, a rebirth, a golden age. You have a golden age or a renaissance, a rebirth here when it comes with Rome. And so just like they were glorifying the past, okay, Rome is glorifying the past, right? The Medicis, the popes, they hire these artists, these architects, mathematicians, poets, and they make all these things that are always pointing to glorifying the past, the glory of Rome. You have the Vitruvian Man by Leonardo da Vinci, where he's talking about Vitruvius, an architect of old. You have Brunelleschi's dome in Florence, which is much modeled after the domes of ancient Rome, etc. You have Raphael, he paints the School of Athens, where it's all different Roman and Greek figures, famous figures. And that's even a parallel when you talk about Greece and Rome. But that's for later. And so Rome, okay, now this papal Rome, because here we have pagan Rome, and now we have papal Rome. Just like here you have ancient Babylon, and here you have Neo-Babylon. So it's different, yet it's copying what it did in the past. Now, again, nothing new under the sun. Rome falls, okay? It falls whether you want to say that it falls with the Protestant Reformation, the protest, okay? Or when it falls to General Berthier, Napoleon's general in the French Revolution, or after the French Revolution in 1798, okay? Either way, okay, Rome falls, okay? And we can go into more detail on this as well. But there are a lot of things here that I'd like to pull out of this. I wrote a couple notes just because I didn't want to miss anything. And I know I'm going to miss a lot of things. A lot of these things I actually have on the computer, and but I was going to show you slides or pictures, but I don't think I have to. I think that you guys could do your own homework. I'm a big advocate of people looking at things for themselves. What I really want to focus on is what happens here. Okay, and this is very important, right? Because shortly after the fall of Babylon, a lot of things happen here, but we'll mention them in a second. What I want to get to are the republics. Okay, so Babylon falls, and then in 509 BC, okay, you have the Roman Republic that begins to increase in power, right? And so the Roman Republic begins, and then it becomes an empire, again, in 27 BC. Of course, as the empire keeps on growing, and that's where we come here. The parallel that we have today is after the fall of the papacy, okay, whether you want to say with the Protestant Reformation or with the fall of Rome in 1798, just decades before 1798 was the independence of the United States. You know, we became a republic, okay, an independent country. And so you have here the United States also as a republic growing, okay. When Rome is an empire is when you have the first coming of Christ. When the United States becomes a hegemony, or whatever you want to say, are we going to see also the second coming of Christ? So, again, a parallel. After the fall of Babylon, just like after the fall of Rome, you had here the Septuagint, okay, Bible created. The Septuagint Bible was when, this is a little, of course, after Cyrus, but when Greek was the international language, and the best scholars, Greek and Jewish speaking, Hebrew, I should say, speaking scholars, got together and produced the Septuagint, which was the first translation of the Old Testament into the international language. And so here, at this time, was when, God's word was accessible to everyone. Remember in the book of John, when Jesus goes to the temple, it says that Greeks came to hear him, that they had heard of him, and that they came to hear him. It would have specified if it was Hebrew Greeks. No, it says Greeks came to listen and to see Christ for themselves. Well, the Septuagint, again, the Greek Bible was created. Again, right here, around this time, this was 1610, is when the King James Version of the Bible was created. Here you have, and of course there was translations before that, but you have, just like you have the God's Word, available in that day's international tongue, here you have the Bible being translated into English, into German, into French, etc. And so there's many parallels. You have also here the Enlightenment, right? Where you have all these modern day philosophers. But what were they doing? They were quoting the philosophers of the past. All of those philosophers lived right here. They were after the fall of Rome. Okay, Socrates, for example, lived 30 years, after the fall of Babylon. And so those that were quoted here, it was just, again, another parallel. And so what you have here, I have a really good book. I wonder if it's right here or not. There it is. It's called The Hebrew Republic. It's written by a Harvard graduate, and he talks about, this is a very, very, very good book. Look at this. This is where he cites his material, and this is where he writes. So what I'm saying is like half of the book is him citing what he's writing, which is impressive. But what he really points out are, those that produced the Constitution of the United States, those that produced liberty of conscience, were Bible students. You have to read the book. I have to do another video and just read some pages from this book, because he references all of the writers of that time and he separates the humanist writers, right, from the 1400s, 13 to 1500s, I should say. And then he grabs all of the writers really that came out of the Protestant Reformation. But don't think of just Protestants, but just really writers that came from that time. And it's just, anyway, the book speaks for itself. The writings speak for themselves. That liberty of conscience and the freedom that we have today came from the scriptures. It comes from the Bible. Those that before the Bible was accessible, it was really suppression, and it was the opposite of liberty of conscience. Another thing that I think is important to note, a lot of my friends in Europe, they might make fun of the United States as being overly religious. We are known as being overly religious, and we are. But what I think is really interesting is I was just reading this. Cicero, who was alive and served in the Senate, he was an orator during the Roman Republic. So not during the Empire, but during this period. He writes about how Rome, the Roman Republic, was the most religious of the empires of that time, and they prided themselves for their observance of religious matters. And so I just think that's interesting in that Rome, the Roman Republic was proud, of how it valued religion. And then here you have the United States being known for the same thing, being a religious country, or having more religiosity than other countries in general. But what happens is that when Rome becomes an empire, is when you have an emperor, and the emperor takes the place of God, and etc. When it places the state above the individual. It places the state above an individual's religious beliefs or their spirituality. That's what happens here. The United States eventually will suppress liberty of conscience. And of course, it's going to be in a subtle way. But if we're looking at a historical parallel, we see it coming. So anything else that I want to talk about? But anyway, it was just interesting thinking of these things, right? You have Rome that was just like you have Nimrod, who starts the cities and it grows into this big empire and it divides. You have, did I mix up my words? Anyway, so Mesopotamia grows and it divides. You have Romulus that founds Rome and that it grows and then it divides into Rome and Constantinople, or the West and the East. What else can I say here? I think that's a good place to stop. I know that I'm forgetting something. For those that want to learn, okay, here's a good book that I've been reading. It's called The Two Republics. Pretty obvious what it's talking about. Rome and the United States of America by Alonzo T. Jones. Very good book. A very full book, a very heavy book. You can listen to this on YouTube. Okay. And so what I do is I read a chapter and then I listen to it. I like to do both because it helps me in understanding something better, just that I can kind of ruminate and think about it. But rather than dragging this on, I'm going to stop this video. I want people to think about the times that we're living in, right? Most people that are watching this video, I think, are familiar with the sabbatical cycle that we were talking about. This 7-year cycle that we see throughout history, starting really with the 70-week prophecy in Daniel chapter 9. But this pattern we see coming all the way down to today, right? And so if you go in these 7-year increments, right, which is a biblical concept, and remember that it restarted on the Day of Atonement, so that was September or October, according to the lunar cycle. We have this 7-year cycle, okay? And it's interesting that it falls on, right, here we are, 2022. It was 2015, 2008, okay, 2001, 1994, okay, and it goes, beyond that. But did I skip that? Okay, you get it. So here we had Black Monday, an economic crash. If you go onto the Dow Jones and you maximize it, you'll see that there is a pattern, and that this pattern becomes more and more erratic every 7 years. Okay, so zoom in to the max, okay, and it'll go like this, and there'll be a little crash, okay, in September of 87. It's called Black Monday. And then it picks up, and it goes here to, this was October, I believe, of 94, where you had the Bond massacre, another, marked inflation and the economy being affected. And then when it comes to 2002, we have another dip in the market. And everyone knows this. September of 2001 was 9/11, right? Then you come to 2008, September, and you have the housing market crisis. Okay. You come to September of 2015, you have the Pope that speaks to Congress. Big deal. That's very significant prophetically. And you have another economic, a dip in the economy. And here we are today, in 2022. Remember that the market was down to like 7,000, okay, here in 2008. And here we are in 2002, and it's in the 30s, up to 35. For those that don't think that this is inflated or that there's something wrong, I don't know. But if this has been repeating itself for the past 7 years, for who knows how long, what is not to say that we're going to see something happen this fall? And so I'm not trying to scare people, but I'm just trying to, I want people to be prepared, just psychologically, if something was to happen. People should always have a plan B. But I do think that with the last years, with COVID and with this current Ukraine-Russia war, that the whole world is just hungry for war, that it's not going to be that much more time until, the last straw, the straw that broke the camel's back, okay? And so I would be watching what happens this coming fall, okay? Another thing that I wanted to mention is to be cognizant of what I believe would be the food shortages, right? If the economy falls, okay, already with the Ukrainian war, we have a decrease in fertilizer production, a decrease in grain and wheat. And this is going to, I don't know if it's going to affect us that much, but it's going to affect Africa, countries, continents, countries that are more vulnerable. Because when the amount of food goes down, okay, and the price goes up, the people that can afford it are the rich countries. And so I do suspect that we will be seeing famine in other countries. I think, anyway, there's other things that I have written down here. I don't think that I want to go into it because that's for a whole nother subject. I hope this video was somewhat helpful. And until next time, give me write me an email or just message me if you wanted to talk more about this. I'd be happy to talk on the phone and kind of help with a Bible study. The book of Daniel and Revelation are very significant and I think very important to understand in these times. Whether you believe in the Bible or not, it doesn't really matter. You should be well read, right? I have, a lot of books here that are of other different ways of thinking. It's important to read, have a broad base of literature. And so we'll leave it at that. Thanks guys for watching, and until next time.